Okay, so now we're looking at verse 12 in Isaiah chapter 14, and the infamous verse, right? The infamous verse. Okay, so in verse 12 it says, "Eich nafalta mishamayim, Hillel ben Shahar, nigdata la'aretz holesh al goyim." Okay, so and it says that thou art fallen from heaven, and the English translations it says Lucifer, son of the morning. Okay, how are you cut down to the ground, which weakens the nation? Okay, so when we see this description of the one who fell from heaven, right? And we note that the word Lucifer here is not, the word Lucifer is not in the Hebrew Bible. And so what we do is we try and look around to figure out what's going on here. And one place to look is in the Septuagint. And when I looked in the Septuagint, you can see here, I kind of tried to highlight in blue. It says exapesane, which means fall, in arano, meaning heaven, and eospharos, okay, meaning bringer of the morning, and anatelon, meaning making the morning rise. Okay, so we look at the Septuagint, and none of these Greek words have the word Lucifer. Okay, and neither does the Hebrew text. And the fact is that it is the Latin Vulgate that has the word Lucifer right here, and you can see it. And this is where we get the word Lucifer from. And we note that this is interesting. I thought, why do the English translations draw upon the Latin Vulgate here? And it could be because of tradition. That is believed that this verse in Isaiah 14:12 is referring to the evil one, to Satan, to Lucifer, right? And that's where that his name comes from, from your English translation says, Satan being Lucifer. And so when this reminds us of those other two references we talked about in Luke chapter 10 verse 18, and in Revelation chapter 12 verses 8 to 9. So Luke 10:18, and Yeshua is speaking here, and he said unto them, I beheld Satan as lightning fall from heaven. And in Revelation 12 verses 8 and 9 it says, and prevailed not, neither was their place found any more in heaven. And the great dragon was cast out, that old serpent called the devil and Satan, which deceiveth the whole world. He was cast out into the earth, and his angels were cast out with him. Okay, so these passages, they have a parallel to what we're reading here in Isaiah 14:12. And these passages from Luke 10 verse 18 and Revelation 12 verses 8 through 9 speak to the fall of Satan. So some commentators believe that this is what is happening in the text and was what Yeshua was referring to in Luke. Now John Oswalt, he states the following concerning this verse, and he says that the day star of the morning reflects the likelihood that the Hillel ben Shahar refers to the planet Venus, which never reaches the zenith before the sun rises and apparently extinguishes it. Hillel probably comes from the root meaning bright, and thus logically applies to the brightest star in the Canaanite mythology, the god Ophtar, with whom the gods attempt to replace Baal at one point, may also be the morning star in that story. However, Ophtar does not seek the position. Upon finding himself unsuited for it, voluntarily leaves it. Recently attempts to derive the Isaiah account from the Greek myth of Phaeton, in which the central figure loses control of the chariot of the sun and is struck by a thunderbolt of Zeus, is, in order to save the earth from the sun's fire, suffered from the evidence that the Greek myth is derived from Near Eastern stories rather than being the precursor of them. Once again, the indications are that the prophet was not dependent upon anyone's story, but used a number of current motifs to fit his own point. Weak upon the nations is translated in the AV, the Authorized Version, the RSV, as who weakened the nations. But the normal meaning of the verb is intransitive, and the parallel, cast down on the earth, weak on the nations, yields a good sense when appropriately interpreted in the NEB, sprawling across the nations. Okay, so that was John Oswald in his commentary on pages 321 to 322. Now, it's interesting that this word, let me go back to the text. It's interesting, this word, Halel, okay, Halel means, it's a hapax, okay, it's a hapax, legamon. So meaning that it only occurs once in the Tanakh, right? This is a word that occurs infrequently, once. So the idea is that the English translators had some difficulty figuring out what this word meant. So in the case of the King James, they chose to use the Latin Vulgate, Lucifer, and when we look at the Latin Vulgate, the Lucifer is treated as the morning star from the Hebrew text. Okay, so it's translated, from that. And so the word Lucifer was not treated as a proper name. And we'll go back to that, because you see the word Lucifer here is in the lowercase. When it's transliterated here from in the Latin, it's in the lowercase. So we know that it's not a proper name. It's not being used as a proper name in the Latin Vulgate, right? And so some people get confused over this issue of the proper name, and then claim that Lucifer is the morning star. And I've heard this one before too, that they say, oh look, the devil is the morning star here, according to Isaiah 14 verse 12. And you look in the book of Revelation, it says Yeshua is the morning star. So Lucifer and Jesus are equal to each other. I've heard that argument too. And there's a confusion here because they don't understand what we're seeing here in the translations. That lead readers to the identification of this morning star. And the claim then is that Lucifer equals Jesus is actually a convolution of the errors that are being made in the English translations, drawing upon the Latin Vulgate and Greek, and as opposed to just translating what the Hebrew text states. And we note that when we read the Latin Vulgate, the word Lucifer is not a proper name, but actually the Latin for morning star. And so the word Lucifer occurs 4 times in the Vulgate. And so we got in Isaiah 14:12, we got in Job 11:17, Job 38 verse 32, and 2 Peter 1:19. And so according to Job 11:17, the King James renders the Hebrew word bakar, boker, morning, as Lucifer. Okay, and the idea of the evil one, Satan, falling from heaven, being connected here to Satan, or to the Isaiah text, it does have some basis in the idea of pride leading to one's fall. And this is consistent with what we've been reading thus far in Isaiah, right? That this pride is what has led to the sin of Israel and Judah and Jerusalem, right? And the word Lucifer does not provide a proof text for Satan falling from heaven, that the pride of men and even spiritual beings such as angels will lead to one's fall from heaven, right? And being cast out of heaven. And we note that is what pride does, right? And we note how sin does this, and that we read in the final chapters of Revelation, chapter 20 and 21, regarding the sinners not being allowed into heaven, right? These New Testament passages do seem to be alluding to Isaiah 14 verse 12, and in the connection to the fall of the one that is mentioned here with the fall of Satan. And the most interesting is that this king of Babylon that is being spoken of, he is never named. Okay, so it just leaves this air of mystery, going on. And so the major premise is to what Isaiah has been speaking of, and that is that pride leads to a fall. Okay, pride always leads to a fall. Okay, so now we're looking at Isaiah 14 verses 13 and 14. Okay, so it says the following. It says, Va'ata amarta bilavavecha hashamayim e'ele Okay, that for you have said in your heart, I will ascend, right? I will ascend into heaven. And then Mima'al lekochavei el arim kisi, and that I will exalt my throne above the stars of God, and the Eshev Bahar. What happened? Okay, hold on a second here. I got a screen issue. Why is it doing all that? You know, it just, there's always something, right? Okay, get it down there. Okay, I think I got it. Yay. Ugh. Always technical difficulties. Okay, so, okay, so we're in the last part of the verse. It says, the Eshev Bahar Moed Beyarkatai Shafon, meaning that I will set upon the mountain of the congregations in the sides of the north. And then in verse 14 it says, E'ele al bamatai av, that I will ascend above the heights of the clouds, and edame le'elyon, and I will be like the Almighty. Okay, and so this Isaiah 14 verses 13 to 14 here, it speaks of the extent of pride in one's life that is claiming to be exalted above even the stars of heaven and even the throne of God, which is above the stars. And John Oswald says that there are some similarities between these verses and the Ugaritic poem. So here, God is referred to in the singular as El. Where was that? Yeah, in the singular as El right here. And that's as opposed to Elohim, right, that we read in the Canaanite poem. According to Canaanite beliefs, there is a pantheon of gods who existed under Elohim, right, and gods such as Baal, as being one of them. And this leads to reasons why Israel was so easily incorporated the worship of Baal and Ashtaroth and coupling their beliefs with the God of Israel. It was because of the Canaanite understanding of God, of Elohim, right? And so the idea here is that Isaiah is making this king of Babylon to inspire to the kingship of the gods. And we note that in the Tanakh, throughout 1st and 2nd Samuel and 1st and 2nd Kings, we read the Hebrew word bamot, right, the high places in which the people sacrificed and worshiped. These hilltops were places for sacrifices to these gods, analogous to being as high as the heavens, right? And we note that there are some mountains, generally speaking, that are higher than the clouds, providing this kind of imagery, right? And so this statement where he says, Ele al bamatai av edame le'elyon, that I will circle this, that I will ascend above the heavens of the clouds. I will be like the Most High. Ascend above the heights of the clouds. I will be like the Most High. And it speaks to these high places, right? And the Tanakh describes God's power as manifested in His stepping on the high places. We read about this in Amos chapter 4, verse 13, and Micah 1:3. So I have these scriptures here. Yeah, okay, so it says in Amos 4:13, it says, For lo, he that forms the mountains and created the winds and descended, or declareth unto man what is his thought, that maketh the morning darkness and treadeth upon the high places, right? Treadeth upon the high places of the earth. The Lord, the God of hosts, is his name. Okay, so you get this idea of the Lord being, up on these high places. And then in Micah 1:3-4, This is, for behold, the Lord cometh forth out of his place, and will come down and tread upon the high places of the earth. And the mountains shall be molten under him, and the valleys shall cleft as wax before the fire, and as the waters that are poured out down a steep place. And so the idea is that the presence of God will literally cause the mountains to just melt away, right, and from his presence. And so these mountain places of worship provide this perception of the power of God, and so they are places for offering sacrifices to the gods. So that's where that comes from, and this is what the author of Isaiah is describing as the level of man's pride, as striving for greater, to be greater than the heights of heaven, right? That where God's throne is. Okay, so next we're looking at verse 15. Okay. So it says, Ach el Sheol Turad el Yarketai Vor. Okay, Vor. Okay, so you see this Turad, right? That's this very similar. It's in the Hufal verb pattern, and it means that you have been brought down to hell, to the sides of the pit. Okay, so you got this again. You got this. Remember we talked about it regarding Hurad, right? That of being brought down. You know, something that's happening to this person, right? And this is what's going on here, is that he will be brought down to hell, to Sheol, to hell, and the pride in and of itself shall lead to this downfall. You know, as Isaiah states that because of these things, this one who exalts himself will be brought down to the grave, to hell, and to the pit. So he's basically being humbled by God. You know, this king, in his pride, is brought down low, being humbled, right, and he dies. And remember, from the Torah perspective, we read in Genesis and Bereshit chapter 3, the claim was that the forbidden fruit would make them like God, in Genesis 3 verse 5. So this, however, was farther from the truth, right, as eating the fruit and participating in disobedience led to sin and the curse of sin, not just upon man, but upon all of the world. And so these things describe the disgrace of sin and the terrible fate of those who are unrepentant before God. Okay. Now we're looking at verses 16 and 17. Okay, it says, Roecha elecha yashkihu elecha yit bonanu. Okay, so that they will see you, shall narrowly look upon you and consider you. And Chazeh Ha'ish Margiz Haaretz Marish Mamlachot, meaning that saying, is this the man that made the earth to tremble and shake kingdoms? Okay, and then Sam Tevel Kemidbar, that made the world as a midbar, right, a wilderness, and Ve'arei Haras Asirav Lo Patach Baita, that and destroyed the cities and that opened up the house of his prisoners. Okay, so the people observing okay, so when the Lord humbles this great king, okay, that the people ask this question, and they say, is this the man? Okay, is this the man? Right here it is. Hazeh Ha'ish, that caused the world to tremble, right? And it caused the world, the earth to tremble and shook kingdoms, right? And so the people observing, this reminded me of the people observing the corpse of the Babylonian king, right? And it reminds me of Isaiah 66 verse 24. So let's see if I got that. Yeah, right here. Okay, so they will go forth and look at the corpses, right, of the men that transgressed the Lord. In me, it says, in me. And for their worm does not die, right? And the fire is not quenched. They shall be an abhorrence unto the Lord. They'll be just an abomination to all flesh, right? And so the people of God will inspect those who are perishing, and according to Isaiah chapter 66. And here the situation is that in this world, thus the king had wealth, power, and everything he wanted, but in the Olam Haba, the tables are changed, the tables are turned, right? And the point is that this world is preparation for the world to come. And in the Olam Hazeh, in this world, the king caused terror and sorrow in others, and in the Olam Haba, the terror and sorrow was his reward, right? And so what we're being taught is that this world belongs to God, and all that we have is simply a gift. Simply put, pride takes a person away from the truth, and this is a spiritual malady, because based upon what Isaiah has been telling us, pride denies the Lord God in heaven. Now, Solomon, he wrote in Proverbs 16, verse 18, he says, pride goes before destruction, a haughty spirit before a fall. And in verse 19, he says, better to live humbly with the poor than to share plunder with the proud. Okay, so Solomon, he knew something, right? And what we are being taught is that it is better to live humbly so that we can seek the Lord than to live pridefully and end up like this Babylonian king. And then Isaiah, go back to the Isaiah text. So he says in verses 18 and 19, he says, Kol Melechei Goyim, Kulam, all of them, all of the kings of the nations, all of them, Shachvu Bechavod, they dwell in their glory. Each man in his house, Ish Beveito, right? And then it goes on, and it says, Va'ata Hashlachta Mikivrecha Kenetzar Nitav, meaning that, and you shall cast out of your grave like an abominable branch. Okay, and then Lavush Harugim Mitoane Charev, meaning that, and as a remnant of those that are slain, be thrust with the sword. Okay, and then Yordei El Avnei Vor Kefeger Muvas, meaning that, and go down to the stones of the pit as a carcass that is trampled under the foot. Okay, so when in Isaiah 14:18, the kings of the earth lying in their glory, and so we're looking at this verse. It says all the kings of the earth, all of them, they're lying in their glory, right? And this reminds us of the honorable burial, that they're buried with their swords and their shields, right? And it's similar to like the words that's described in 2 Kings 12 verse 22. It says they were buried with their ancestors in the city of David. So you get this picture of honorable burials, that they were buried with their ancestors. And the Babylonian king, however, because of his pride, will not be buried in the tomb of his ancestors. And the way Isaiah speaks, according to Isaiah 14:19, the idea is that he doesn't even find a place to rest after death, right? The king is cast out of the grave, and Isaiah says he will be like the abominable branch, and that is Kenetzev Nitav. And let's see, where was that? Oh, right here. Yeah, Kenneth said, and the abominable branch. And so I thought, what is an abominable branch? Let's look this up. Let's look this up. So I went on to the internet, did a search to try and study what's been said concerning this kind of branch in its previous usage. And interesting, the only thing that comes up is a video game called Elden Ring. Okay, this video game consists of casting spells and fighting various otherworldly creatures. Okay, and in that interesting correlation there, right? And so the term abominable branch is a mod to the game that helps fight monsters. And the description of this says that the abominable branch is made up of nether bees that become more and more evil as you breed them, and by the time you bred them to perfection, they can kill within seconds. They're called the infernal bee or the magic bee. Okay, so end quote. Okay, so the purpose I felt for mentioning that this is what this video game description is that of ever increasing wickedness or evil, right? In this idea of the abominable branch, based on the video game, right? And I thought this is the description. This fit the description of the abominable branch, and it provides us with a interesting modern perspective on Isaiah's ancient words that's describing this wicked king. And it's also interesting how this kind of correlates to witchcraft. We see what's going on in the video game, right, that people play. And you've got this correlation which is witchcraft, which is rebellion against God. There's so much correlation here. Fascinating, right? And so this provides us with a parallel description to the evil one, right, to Satan, right? In Isaiah, he goes on to say that that this one was clothed with the dead slain who are pierced with the sword. And so the description here is of the one who is clothed that with the blood of the slain. As we note, the antithesis to what the Messiah did. He isn't clothed in the blood of the slain. He gave his own blood, right, for the forgiveness of sins, as opposed to the one who would kill, steal, and destroy, being clothed with those whom he has slain, right? And the word lavush is right here, and this word here, to be clothed, right, and describes the nature of this evil one as being covered with corpses. And we note that we serve the God of the living, right? Read Mark chapter 12. The evil one, based upon these descriptions, is the God of the dead, of death and destruction and suffering. The idea is that the intended purpose of these descriptions is that this one who delighted in destruction and oppression has nothing in the afterlife, with only death and the dead as his shroud. And we note what something Yeshua taught concerning the treasures in this world, in the world to come, in the Olam Haba. So we're looking at Matthew 6, verses 19 to 20. Let's see where we at here. Okay, yeah. Matthew 6, 19 to 20. And it says, we got a couple of references here. So it says, do not lay up for yourselves treasures on earth. Okay, I'll underline that. Where moth and rust destroy, and where thieves break in and steal. And but lay up for yourselves treasures in heaven, where neither moth nor dust destroy, for where thieves do not break in and steal. For where your treasure is, there your heart will be also. And then we got Matthew 19, verse 21. Jesus replied, if you want to be perfect, go sell your possessions and give to the poor, and you will have treasure in heaven. Right? And then in Mark 10, verse 21, it says, Then Jesus beheld him, loving him, and said to him, one thing you lack. Go your way, sell whatsoever you have, and give to the poor, and you shall have treasure in heaven. And come and take up the cross and follow me. Okay? So, the point is that the kind of God that we serve encourages having mercy, being forgiven, right? And showing kindness to others. And love, as opposed to being filled with hatred and war and oppression and a blood lust, a bloodthirst, right? The Lord God who calls us is filled with love for us and desires that we have this kind of attitude to love God and to love one another. Okay. And then we're looking at the last two verses here. We're looking at Isaiah chapter 14, verses 20 and 21. And he says, Lo techad itam bikvura, meaning that you should not be joined with them in burial. And ki aretzacha shichata, meaning that and because you have destroyed your land, and amacha haragta lo yikare leolam zera meraim, and it means and slain your people, the seed of evildoers shall never be renowned. And then haki levanav matbeach the avon avotam, meaning that prepare slaughter for his children for the iniquity of their fathers. And then bal yakumu the yarshu aretz umalu pene tevel arim, and they do not rise or possess the land or fill the face of the world with cities. Okay, and tevel is an interesting word because this kind of represents this dry land, right? And we notice something here about what Isaiah is saying according to Isaiah 14 verse 20. He says, do not be joined with them, lo techad itam, in their graves. Okay, do not be joined with them in their graves. And so this suggests that for those who participate in the same kinds of sins, they will be joined with them in the afterlife. And so you think about this for a moment. I think this is interesting to think about, because when you participate with sinners in this world, in the Olam Haba, the world to come, will be placed with them in that group, in that category, with them. And so if you want to be with the righteous, live righteously, right? Don't live as the sinners do. And this is similar to what we read in the apostolic writings in the New Testament, and according to Matthew 25 verses 31 to 46. Let's see if I got that right here. It's quite long. So it says the following. Okay, so it says, when the Son of Man comes in his glory, this is the return of the Lord, okay, and all the angels with him, he will sit on his glorious throne, and all the nations will be gathered before him, and he will separate the people one from another, as a shepherd separates the sheep from the goats. He will put the sheep on his right and the goats on his left. The king will say to those on his right, come, you who are blessed by my Father, take your inheritance, the kingdom prepared for you since the creation of the world. For I was hungry, and you gave me something to eat. I was thirsty, and you gave me something to drink. I was a stranger, and you invited me in. I needed clothes, and you clothed me. I was sick, and you looked after me. I was in prison, and you came to visit me. Then the righteous will answer him, Lord, when did we see you hungry and feed you, or thirsty and give you something to drink? When did we see you a stranger and invite you in, or needing clothes and clothe you? When did we see you sick or in prison and go to visit you? The king will reply, truly I tell you, whatever you did for one of the least of these brothers and sisters of mine, you did for me. Then you will say to those on the left. Remember, we were talking about the left and the right, right? Depart from me, you who are cursed, into the eternal fire prepared for the devil and his angels. For I was hungry, and you gave me nothing to eat. I was thirsty, and you gave me nothing to drink. I was a stranger, and you did not invite me in. I needed clothes, and you did not clothe me. I was sick and in prison, and you did not look after me. They also will answer, Lord, when did we see you hungry or thirsty or a stranger or needing clothes or sick or in prison and did not help you? And he will reply, truly I tell you, whatever you did not do for one of the least of these, you did not do for me. Then they will go away into eternal punishment, but the righteous to eternal life. Okay? And so we know this distinction that is the differences between the goats and the sheep. Goats wander off, they like to do their own thing, and they eat everything, right? They're indiscriminate, right? And sheep, however, they need care. They follow a shepherd. They need a shepherd, and so forth. And even they must drink from still waters. They won't drink from moving water, right? And so the description is given here in Matthew 5:25. Speaks of the goats being gathered together at the judgment day. And this is similar to what Isaiah is saying concerning the wicked, according to Isaiah 14, verse 20, of being joined with one another in the afterlife, or the grave, per the descriptions here, that the sheep, the sheep follows Yeshua, Jesus, right, and walking in his footsteps, whereas the goats do not. Yeshua's footsteps are based upon the Holy Scriptures. And so the one who walks in Yeshua's footsteps is living his life according to God's Word, according to Torah, right? And pride and arrogance have fueled these tyrants, these evils that they do, right? And we're being told the end result of those who do these things, living for themselves as opposed to living for the Lord God in heaven and for others. Isaiah, he goes on and he says, prepare slaughter for his children for the iniquity of their fathers, that they do not rise nor possess the land, nor fill the face of the world with cities. And so we're looking at this last part here. Let's circle it. Okay, so the final outcome for those who live as the fallen one does will be their destruction. We note the history of Israel according to 2 Kings chapters 12 through 25. How the kings of Israel, it says that there are some that do what is right in the eyes of the Lord all of their days. And then there are some that do what was evil in the eyes of the Lord. So we see this in the 2 Kings. And the reign of the king would be long for those who did what was right, as opposed to a short reign for those who did what was evil. So when a righteous king came along, they would do what they could to erase the evils of the former king. And in destroying the places of worship, Baal and Ashtaroth, right? But we are told they would not remove the high places, right? And these that remained continued as a poison to the people of Israel. And this is why Isaiah speaks of the Lord ultimately needing to remove all sin and wickedness from the earth. This is tikkun olam, right? This healing of the land, the restoration of the land, tikkun olam, and of the world, right? And that it is through this removal of the wicked that this happens. And this is what Isaiah is speaking of. And this is why Isaiah, he speaks ultimately of the Lord needing to remove all of sin and wickedness from the earth. And pride ends in forgetting the one who is prideful. His memory and his actions go unremembered, right? Those who are wicked and destroyed by death, and those wanting to forget the evils of his reign, right? And so when an evil king dies, people want to forget this dude because he was so wicked, and they don't want to remember how bad it was, right? And on the other hand, Isaiah states that those who are humble, those who humble themselves by laying aside their pride, who are the servants of the living God, will live forever in his memory. Right? Isn't that a fantastic picture, right, of who we are in the Messiah?